The dawn came soft and golden across the prairie, painting the eastern horizon in shades of rose and amber. Sarah stood at the window of the soddy, watching the light spread across the grasslands like spilled honey. Behind her, the house was quiet, Thomas still asleep in his small bed, her parents' door closed. The stillness felt fragile, as if the world held its breath before the next storm. She hadn't slept well. Every time she'd closed her eyes, she saw Robert Kane's broken body at the bottom of the mine shaft, heard Edmund Whitmore's measured voice explaining how powerful men in Montreal and Toronto would use the law itself as a weapon against her family. They'd survived Blackwood's violence, his hired guns, the siege that had nearly killed them all. But this new threat felt different, invisible, inexorable, patient as winter. The letter Kane had carried lay on the kitchen table where her father had left it last night. Sarah moved toward it, drawn despite herself. The words were burned into her memory now. The Mackenzie claim must be tied up in litigation long enough for them to default on existing debts. They cannot be allowed to develop the mine or secure financing against it. Someone had written those words in a comfortable office, probably hundreds of miles away. Someone who saw her family not as people, but as obstacles to be removed through procedure and paperwork. The coldness of it made her stomach tight. "You're up early." Sarah turned to find her mother in the doorway, already dressed, her dark hair pulled back in a simple bun. Eleanor's face showed the strain of recent weeks. New lines around her eyes, a tightness to her mouth that hadn't been there before they'd found the mine. But her gaze was steady as she crossed to the stove and began building up the fire. "Couldn't sleep," Sarah admitted. "Kept thinking about what Mr. Whitmore said, about how they'll use the courts to bury us." Eleanor was silent for a moment, feeding kindling into the firebox with practiced efficiency. When she spoke, her voice was quiet but firm. "Your father and I have been talking about what comes next." Sarah waited, watching her mother's hands move through the familiar morning ritual. Fire built, water kettle set to boil, yesterday's biscuits unwrapped from their cloth. "We're going to fight," Eleanor continued. "Not the way we fought Blackwood, not with guns and barricades, but we're going to fight nonetheless. Your father wants to go on the offensive, find out who these people are, expose them before they can bury us in legal proceedings." She paused, meeting Sarah's eyes. "It's going to be harder than anything we've faced so far, and it's going to take longer." "How much longer?" "Months, maybe years." Eleanor's expression was grave. "Mr. Whitmore was clear about that. Even if we win, it won't be quick or easy." Sarah moved to the window again, looking out at the land they'd fought so hard to keep. The wheat field stretched away to the south, the stalks golden and heavy despite the drought that had threatened them. Beyond that, hidden in the coulee to the east, lay the mine shaft that held their fortune and their curse. "Do you ever wish we'd never found it?" Sarah asked quietly. "The mine, I mean, that we'd just stayed ordinary homesteaders struggling like everyone else?" Eleanor was quiet for so long that Sarah thought she might not answer. When she finally spoke, her voice carried a weight of complicated truth. "Sometimes, in the middle of the night, when I think about what could have happened to you and your father, what still might happen." She trailed off, then shook her head. "But then I remember what we were facing before. The bank deadline, the certainty that we'd lose everything we'd built. At least now we have a chance, a real chance at something more than just survival." The kettle began to whistle softly. Eleanor moved to make tea, her movements economical and sure. "Your father's riding into Medicine Hat this morning. Mr. Whitmore wants to review all our homestead documentation, make sure there are no irregularities that could be exploited. And Martha Thornton is sending that telegram to her sister in Calgary." "About the consortium?" "Yes." Eleanor poured hot water over tea leaves, the familiar scent filling the small kitchen. "If we can find out who they are, what connections they have, maybe we can find leverage, something to make them back off." Sarah turned from the window, "And if we can't?" Her mother's expression was resolute. "Then we fight anyway. We've come too far to give up now." The sound of hoofbeats drew their attention. Through the window, Sarah could see two riders approaching from the north, Daniel and his father, Samuel. Even at a distance, she could see Daniel favoring his wounded side, sitting carefully in the saddle. He shouldn't be writing yet, Eleanor murmured, concern coloring her voice. That wound's barely 2 weeks old. But Sarah felt a warmth spread through her chest at the sight of him. He'd come despite the pain, despite the early hour, because he'd said he would. Because that was who Daniel Thornton was. Steady, reliable, present when it mattered. By the time the Thorntons reached the house, James had emerged from the bedroom, pulling on his coat. He greeted Samuel with a firm handshake, then turned to Daniel with a nod of approval that made the younger man straighten despite his obvious discomfort. "Thought we'd ride into town with you," Samuel said without preamble. "3 of us together is safer than 1 alone. And I want to hear what the land office has to say about proper claim procedures." James glanced at Eleanor, who gave a small nod. "I'd be grateful for the company," he said. "Eleanor, we'll be back by evening. Keep the rifle close, just in case." "I'll stay," Daniel offered, his eyes finding Sarah's. "Help with the chores. Keep watch. I'm not much use for a long ride yet anyway." Sarah saw her parents exchange a look, some silent communication that passed between them in the space of a heartbeat. Then her father smiled, just slightly. "That would ease my mind, Daniel. Thank you." The men departed an hour later after a quick breakfast of biscuits and preserves. Sarah stood in the doorway with her mother, watching them ride south toward Medicine Hat, 3 figures growing smaller against the vast prairie sky. When they disappeared from sight, Eleanor touched Sarah's shoulder gently. "I'm going to check on the chickens and bring in water. Will you wake Thomas? He'll want breakfast." Sarah nodded, but as her mother headed toward the door, she found herself speaking. "Mama, are you frightened?" Eleanor paused, her hand on the doorframe. For a moment, Sarah thought she might deflect, offer some reassurance that everything would be fine. But when her mother turned back, her expression was honest. "Yes," she said simply. "I'm terrified. Not of violence this time, though that's still a possibility, but of losing everything slowly, watching it slip away while we're tangled in legal proceedings we can't afford to fight, of seeing your father's spirit break under the weight of it." She paused. "But I'm also angry, and anger can be useful if you direct it properly." She left then, heading out into the morning sunshine. Sarah stood alone in the kitchen, her mother's words echoing in her mind. Anger can be useful if you direct it properly. She thought about the men in Montreal and Toronto who'd written that letter, who'd offered Robert Kane $1,000 for information about the mine, who saw her family as nothing more than an inconvenience to be managed. They didn't know the Mackenzies, didn't know what they'd survived, what they'd fought through to keep this land. Didn't understand that you couldn't break people who'd already been broken and put themselves back together. Sarah moved to wake her brother, but paused at the window one last time. In the distance, she could just make out the dark line of trees that marked the coulee where the mine lay hidden. Their fortune, their curse, their future. Whatever came next, they would face it together. By mid-morning, the heat had settled over the prairie like a heavy blanket. Sarah worked in the garden with her mother, pulling weeds and checking the vegetables that had survived the summer's drought. Thomas played nearby with his tin soldiers, creating elaborate battles in the dust. Daniel sat on the porch step, ostensibly cleaning his father's rifle, but mostly watching Sarah work. His presence was a comfort, solid and real in a world that felt increasingly uncertain. "Tell me about Calgary," Sarah said suddenly, straightening from her weeding. "Mrs. Thornton's sister. Do you know her?" Daniel looked up, surprised by the question. "Aunt Catherine? Some. She married a railway man named Douglas Fletcher about 5 years ago. They live near the rail yards." He paused. "Why? I'm trying to understand how this works," Sarah said, gesturing vaguely eastward toward the distant city. "How information travels. How people in Montreal know what's happening here. How they find men like Robert Kane to do their work." "The railway," Eleanor said quietly, not looking up from her weeding. "Everything moves on the railway now. Goods, people, letters, telegrams. News travels fast when you have those connections." Daniel nodded slowly. "Father says the CPR changed everything. Before the railway, this was just empty prairie. Now." He trailed off, but Sarah understood. Now they were connected to the wider world, for better and worse. Now powerful men in distant cities could reach across 1,000 miles to threaten a small homestead. The telegram will take a few days, Daniel continued. Even if Aunt Catherine responds quickly, we're looking at a week before we hear anything useful. A week, Sarah repeated. A week of waiting, of watching, of wondering what moves their enemies were making while they gathered information. What do we do in the meantime? Eleanor sat back on her heels, pushing a strand of hair from her face with the back of her hand. We work. We maintain the guard rotation at the mine. We prepare for harvest. The wheat will be ready in another few weeks, and we trust that your father and Mr. Whitmore are doing what needs to be done in town. And we stay alert, Daniel added, his hand resting on the rifle. Just because Kane is dead doesn't mean there aren't others who might try something. The words hung in the hot air, a reminder that despite the morning's peaceful routine, danger still circled like a hawk over a prairie dog colony. Thomas looked up from his soldiers. Is Papa going to be all right? His young voice was matter of fact, but Sarah heard the worry underneath. Eleanor moved to her son, kneeling beside him in the dust. Papa is fine, sweetheart. He's just taking care of some business in town. He'll be home tonight. With Mr. Thornton and Daniel's papa? Yes, with Mr. Thornton. Thomas seemed satisfied with this, returning to his game. But Sarah caught her mother's expression as Eleanor stood, the tightness around her eyes, the way her hand pressed briefly to her stomach as if fighting nausea. She's terrified, Sarah realized. Not just worried, but genuinely terrified that something will happen to Father, that despite everything, they'll still lose. The thought was sobering. Her mother had always been the strong one, the anchor that held them steady. Seeing that strength tested, seeing the fear beneath it, made Sarah feel suddenly older, as if she'd crossed some invisible threshold into a place where parents were no longer invincible, where the future was genuinely uncertain. I'm going to check the water barrel, Eleanor said, her voice carefully neutral. Sarah, can you finish here? Sarah nodded, watching her mother walk toward the house with deliberate composure. When she was out of earshot, Sarah moved to sit beside Daniel on the porch step. She's scared, she said quietly. Daniel's hand found hers, his calloused fingers warm and solid. We all are, but scared doesn't mean defeated. No, Sarah agreed. It doesn't. They sat in comfortable silence, hands linked, watching the prairie grass bend in the hot wind. Somewhere to the south, her father was riding toward Medicine Hat, toward answers or complications or both. Somewhere to the east, in Calgary, a telegram would soon arrive asking questions about mining consortiums and railway connections. And somewhere, Montreal, Toronto, maybe even closer, powerful men were planning their next move against a family they'd never met. But here, in this moment, Sarah felt the solid warmth of Daniel's hand in hers, heard her brother's cheerful narration of his toy battle, smelled the prairie sage and sun-warmed earth. This was real. This was worth fighting for. Whatever came next, they would face it, together. The afternoons stretched long and hot. Eleanor worked inside, preserving the last of the early vegetables. Thomas napped in the heat, sprawled across his bed like a rag doll. Sarah and Daniel sat in the shade of the house, talking in low voices about everything and nothing, his plans to expand the Thornton homestead, her dreams of education, the uncertain future that waited for them both. When this is over, Daniel said carefully, when the mine is secured and the legal battles are won, what then? Sarah considered the question. A month ago, she would have said she wanted to see the world, to go east to school, to escape the endless horizon of prairie grass. But now, I don't know, she admitted. Everything's changed so much. I've changed. She looked at him directly. But I know I want you in it, whatever it looks like. Daniel's smile was slow and warm, reaching his eyes. That's good, because I'm not going anywhere. The sound of hoofbeats interrupted them, multiple riders approaching fast from the south. Sarah was on her feet instantly, heart pounding, but Daniel's hand on her arm was steady. It's your father, he said, squinting into the distance. And mine, and someone else. Eleanor emerged from the house, wiping her hands on her apron. Together they watched the three riders approach. As they drew closer, Sarah could see her father's grim expression, Samuel Thornton's tight jaw, and between them, a stranger. A tall man in a dark suit, riding with the easy confidence of someone accustomed to long distances. They reined in at the house in a cloud of dust. James dismounted quickly, his face drawn with exhaustion and something else, anger, perhaps, or determination. Eleanor, Sarah. He nodded to them both, then gestured to the stranger. This is Henry Blackburn. He's a Pinkerton detective from Chicago. Sarah felt the world tilt slightly. A Pinkerton? Here? The detective dismounted, removing his hat to reveal iron gray hair and sharp, intelligent eyes. Mrs. Mackenzie. Miss Mackenzie. His voice was cultured with an American accent. I apologize for the dramatic arrival, but your husband and Mr. Thornton felt you should hear what I have to say immediately. About what? Eleanor's voice was wary. Blackburn's expression was grave. About the mining consortium that's been targeting your claim, and about the murder they're willing to commit to get it. The words fell like stones into still water, sending ripples of shock through the gathered family. Sarah felt Daniel move closer, his presence a steadying force. Murder? Eleanor repeated, her face pale. They've done it before, Blackburn said quietly. 3 times that I can prove. Small homesteaders, families like yours, who found valuable deposits on their claims. Each time, the consortium moved in through legal channels while arranging accidents. A house fire, a wagon overturned on a steep trail, a drowning. He paused. I've been tracking them for 2 years, trying to build a case, and now they're here, targeting you. James's hand found Eleanor's, gripping tight. He wants to help us, but there's more. The consortium knows I'm getting close, Blackburn continued. They know I have evidence, which means they're going to move fast now, before I can present my case to the authorities. If they can secure your mine and eliminate the witnesses, they'll have what they want, and we'll be dead, Sarah finished, her voice remarkably steady despite the ice in her veins. Blackburn's eyes met hers with respect. Yes, Miss Mackenzie, that's exactly what I'm afraid of.
Thanks for watching our stories. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more epic adventures. Thanks for watching our stories. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more epic adventures.